already they'd gone from not Christian at all to being able to make what becomes the world's most significant Bible.
Hello and welcome to Talking Theology, the podcast of Cranmer Hall in Durham. My name is Nick Moore, and in this episode we are talking with Lauren Randall about the story of the world's oldest Bible. Lauren, welcome to Talking Theology.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
That's great. Lauren, now you're a PhD student here in Durham. Could you tell us a bit about your story, introduce yourself? How did you come to be working on a PhD, and what's the best thing about being a PhD student?
Well, I started off actually teaching theology to sort of community groups and different parishes and things like that off in the east of England. And while I was doing that, I just kept on feeling that I just didn't have enough knowledge to be able to continue. I'd done a master's, but just really wanted to do a PhD. And I could not decide at all between looking at canon formation and looking at early Christianity in the early medieval period in Britain. And everyone said to me, you can't do both of those things. They're just too different. And I accepted that because obviously you can't do both of those things at the same time. But then I spotted an advert for a PhD studentship here in Durham looking at the Codex Amiatinus. And a key part of Codex Amiatinus is that it is the oldest complete Bible, as you said. And so actually it's a key piece of evidence in the story of canon formation, but it was also produced in the northeast of England in the early medieval period. So it combined both of the things that I really wanted to do.
That's fantastic. And when we say canon formation, what are we talking about?
So canon formation is the way that we got the books of the Bible that made it into the Bible. So it's the process of discernment, of looking at the different texts that could have made it in and didn't, but also the reasons why the books that did make it in.
And you've mentioned the Codex Amiatinus already, the world's oldest whole complete Bible. It's a book that most of us won't have heard of. It sits in a library that most of us won't have heard of in northern Italy. Why should we be interested in it?
Well, it's a massively important book in terms of the history of not only book production, but also the history of Christianity. It's our earliest piece of evidence of an entire Bible. And so that's hugely significant. It's sort of our proto-Bible upon which all of our Bibles today are kind of based. But also it was made in the northeast of England. And that's something that people don't really know or don't really appreciate. And so knowing that, I mean, it's a huge part of the legacy of Britain that we have this book that was made here. And before this point, the Bible wasn't really a thing. It wasn't really a thing as we know it today. It was collections of scriptures. It was separate volumes that were kept in book chests. And, you may not have every single book of the Bible. Even a well-resourced monastery might not have every single book of the Bible as we'd know it today. And so putting the Bible together within one cover makes a huge statement about the unity of Scripture and how important we see the importance that we add to each of the books of the Bible.
And that is something that's quite hard for us to get our heads around, isn't it? Because printed Bibles, whole Bibles, are so available to us, and they have been really for 500 years since the invention of printing. But actually, to think about, the early church only having portions of Scripture and not bringing it together. Just tell us a bit about what would be involved in producing a book like this.
So a huge amount, if we start sort of practically, they'd need a huge number of animal skins to be able to make something. So the Codex Amiatinus would have needed sort of over 500 animals to be sort of killed for the book.
And say it as it is. There's no way around it. If you want vellum or parchment, you've got to,
and I'm sure they ate the animals and all of that. But So they'd have needed a huge amount of skins. Those all needed stretching out, drying, processing with a horribly smelly, disgusting process. All the hair sort of peeled off, and it's horrible, but it's the sort of the way these things were made. They also needed to get enough inks, enough pigments, but not only that, but it's a huge feat of engineering to be able to bind such a large book as the Codex Amiatinus. Um, it ended up being 34 kilograms. It ends up being sort of this big. It's sort of a foot deep. And so to be able to bind a book like that would have taken a huge amount of skill. And then so beyond the sort of practical side of it, um, you'd have also needed to get hold of every single book of the Bible in order to be able to copy them out. And they went for the new translation. They went for Jerome's Vulgate version, and at that point, a lot of the sort of old Latin was going around, and so they had to sort of put in extra effort to be able to find a book in the translation that they wanted for every single book of the Bible. And we can see that in Codex Amiatinus with the book of Joshua, for example, because rather than it being bound in a full sort of chunk like the other sort of sets of books that we see, it's on its own and it looks a little bit more hastily written. It looks like it was sort of done a little bit last minute. And so the theory behind that is that maybe it took even such a well resourced monastery um, a little while longer to find a copy of Joshua in the version that they wanted it.
That's fascinating. And so you've told us a lot very helpfully about how the Bible was made. Tell us a bit about where it was made. You said it was in the northeast of England, but tell us about that.
So it was made in the dual monastery of Wearmouth Jarrow. And this is most famous for being the place where Bede lived and wrote. And so that's where we can kind of imagine all of this happening. And it's a hugely well resourced monastery to be able to achieve this. So in the 670s, a guy called Benedict Bishop was given land by King Egfrith to found a monastery. So he first established St. Peter's in Wearmouth, and the king was so impressed that in the early 680s he gave him more land to found St. Paul's in Jarrow, and so the two became this sort of joint monastery at both sides of the river.
And the remains are still there, aren't they? So you can still go and see Anglo-Saxon architecture. And both Benedict Biscop and Chelfrith, who was the first founding abbot, travelled, didn't they, and bought books and supplied the library there. I sometimes think of it as the equivalent of having super fast broadband in the sort of 7th and 8th centuries. So all this at their disposal, and training these monks to produce these texts. What was the kind of quality of the text? You've given us a sense of the amount of work involved in producing a Bible like this, but can you say anything about the kind of quality of the work that was going on in this place?
It was incredible quality. It's the text, the way that it's written is incredibly clear, incredibly readable. They've innovated, in a sense, they've taken on some sort of insular practices of having word spacing. So some of the exemplars that they'd been taking on their trips to Rome wouldn't have had spaces between each of the words. And that can make it slightly harder to read if you're not used to the text. And so they've put in things like the word spacing. They've put a form of sentence structure to help with understanding as well. And then the actual sort of text itself, the version that they've used, is an incredible witness to the Vulgate. And in fact, it was used in the 16th century as one of the main exemplars to the authorized version of the Vulgate by the Catholic Reformation.
It's fantastic, isn't it? Because we think of northern Britain at that period as just being an outpost on the edge, if not beyond the edges of civilization. But actually, this is a centre of learning that is producing the highest quality material. And Bede, we often know Bede as this father of English history, but actually he's a biblical scholar, and his monastery, his joint monastery, is producing biblical texts and biblical scholarship of the highest order, which is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they make this Bible. I think they make two more for each of the monasteries. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So they made three in total, Bede tells us, and one for each of the monasteries, as you said, and then a third, which they plan on giving as a gift to the body of St. Peter, which is quite a weird phrasing.
Mm. And the body of St. Peter, of course, is located in Rome.
Yes.
So the Bible needs to go on a journey across Europe. Tell us about that journey.
So it was towards the end of the abbot Chilfrith's life, and so part of it was a sort of his final journey. I think the plan was for him to die in Rome with his Bible, and so we have this dedication page at the start of Codex Amiatinus, which originally, more on that later, originally said that this is a gift from Chilfrith, the abbot of the Angles from the far ends of the earth, to the body of St. Peter. And so the body of St. Peter, either referring directly to the body in its tomb in St. Peter's Church in Rome, or it could also be to the Pope, St. Peter's representative on earth. And so a huge cohort of them travelled across the sea and then through sort of what is now France. Unfortunately, Chilfrith dies en route in France, and we don't hear a huge amount about the party after that point. We know that he's buried there in France, and that's sort of it. However, we know that the Codex Amiatinus at least made it to Italy, because it was kept in northern Italy for most of its life. So what happens next is pure speculation. But I think what is most likely is that the group carried on and would have fulfilled Chilfrith's dying wish to take what became the Codex Amiatinus to Rome. And so it's taken to Rome and potentially laid in the church at the shrine of St. Peter, which is just outside the city walls of Rome. And not long after that, Rome is invaded by Lombards. And so at this point, the codex could have been stolen, plundered, taken away, because the next thing that we hear about the Codex Amiatinus is that it is in Monte Amiata in the north of Italy, in the San Salvatore Abbey, which is a Lombard monastery. And so there could be a way that the Lombards took it up there and repurposed it as their own Bible, which is further evidenced in this dedication page, which we now know has little elements of forgery to it. And so where it used to say from Abbot Chilfrith from the far ends of the earth, it now says from Peter of the Lombards, and from St. Saviour's monastery. And so they've kind of covered up some of the origins there. They've hidden the fact that it's from the northeast of England, and they've claimed it as their own, really.
We won't hold it against them, but
No,
yeah.
no.
And just so tell us a bit about how we know that an original dedication has been removed or altered. How can we tell that?
So it wasn't actually discovered until the late 19th century, when researchers were looking at a life of the abbots of Wearmouth Jarrow that was written by one of Bede's contemporaries that includes a record of the original dedication page. And they recognized it as being really, really similar to this one that's in the front of Codex Amiatinus. And upon looking at the one in Amiatinus, they can see that the color of the ink of the forged bits is different to the rest of the page. And part of this is because of the type of ink that was used. So they used what is called iron gall ink, which is a mixture of oak galls, which are these little balls that grow off oak trees. They are formed when wasps lay their eggs on the oak tree, and then it forms a protective shell around these eggs. And this product, which is sort of part of an oak tree, is really rich in tannins. And these tannins, when they're steeped in water and then they're mixed with any sort of iron, um, turns this wonderful rich black color, which then, when mixed with sort of gum arabic or any kind of sap, really, um, has this lovely glossy quality, and it makes this really, really wonderful rich black ink. However, if it is made slightly incorrectly, or if there's a little bit too much iron, then the iron can oxidize, it can rust. And so the forgers, when they made this, they let it be susceptible to rust. And so the portions that were added have this slightly reddish brown quality, as opposed to the rich black text of the original Wearmouth Jarrow text. And so, because of this, they were able to identify it as one of the three Chilfrith Bibles from Wearmouth Jarrow. But that, even in itself, wasn't plain sailing. It was not exactly, front page news at the time, but it was very exciting for the people. So it was in various popular newspapers in the country, and then there's a series of letters from people writing in to say it's absolutely impossible that the northeast of England could have produced such a wonderful manuscript in that time period. And they refused to believe that Amiatinus was from this region.
That's incredible. But actually, what you've said there suggests again the quality of the work being done in the northeast of England, because they were getting the inks right. And then some decades later, someone's done a forgery and they couldn't produce the same quality of ink, even though they were trying to use the same method. Um, there is, I've seen images of this page, and some of the writing is, some of the lettering is quite cramped, isn't it? Were people already suspecting that there was some kind of forgery or alteration there?
There's no record of people being suspicious of it. There are various, sort of portions of other text where the writing is cramped and it's not suspect at all. So it's not necessarily something that people have picked up on. And in fact, they, at the monastery, it was recorded in their library catalogue as being a Bible in the hand of Pope Gregory. And so for most of its existence, people thought that Codex Amiatinus was a good few hundred years older than it actually was, because they'd done such a good job at making this very sort of prestigious looking Bible. So no, people hadn't worked it out. Partly as well because it's done in a very Roman style. It's made to look very Italian, and even when they produced it in the late 7th century, um, it was an antiquated style. So in the same way that, when a child's doing their homework and they've got to make an old document and they're staining it in tea to try and, make it look old and important, they were trying to make it look old and important because that's how the scriptures should look. And so they've made it look Italian, because for them, for Wearmouth Jarrow, that was the seat of Christianity. And so to make a Bible look really good, to make it look authoritative, to make it have the gravity that they wanted it to have, it needed to look Italian. And so they've put a huge amount of effort into sort of making it look how they thought a Bible should look.
That's amazing. And they convinced people centuries later that perhaps it was an earlier and older Bible. And you've told us that story. You've said we don't know exactly what happened, but it feels like we've got pieces that sort of fit together in quite a suggestive way there, haven't we? About it arriving in Rome, being stolen by the Lombards, ending up in Lombardy, and then being repurposed or claimed as their own. That's an incredible story. Now, we started off by saying this is little known, and yet it's a fascinating story. It's also something that reflects really, really well on the heritage, both spiritual and cultural material, of the northeast of England. Um, it's a story that's worth telling. And you've actually been involved in a tour called Rivers of Ink, which introduces this codex and its story to a wider audience. Could you tell us a bit more about Rivers of Ink?
Yes. So Rivers of Ink was a 2 week tour that a group of us did of the northeast of England celebrating the Codex Amiatinus. So it was thought up by my PhD supervisor, Francis Watson, and we worked together with the projection studio, who run sort of these sound and light projection artworks from their studio in London. So that's Karen Monid and Ross Ashton. And they put together this artwork which reflects the story of the making of Codex Amiatinus. So the story that takes us from kind of the dawn of writing through to the production of this absolutely massive book. And so you get a chance to see the artwork in that, and the the beautiful layout of the pages, and how it's this magnificent achievement, and how it fits into sort of wider manuscript culture and sort of wider um, concepts of scripture from the time. And so we started off in High Pittington, just outside of Durham. We went to Lindisfarne, to Jarrow, to Blackfriars medieval restaurant in Newcastle, and we finished at Durham Cathedral as well. So it was amazing to go to these places that are all really quite significant in the history of Christianity in the Northeast, and take this art installation and various talks from different Durham academics about um, early medieval Northumbrian heritage and book production and things like that, and be able to bring that to the public. We had sort of, I think, something like over 1,000 visitors in total, and we put on sort of different shows and talks as well as having the show running. And we had this full size foam version of Codex Amiatinus that I'd made that gives people a sense of the actual size of Amiatinus, which is absolutely huge, as I've said. Um, and that was particularly good because we had a number of schools groups coming in wanting to find out more about the heritage of this region. And so that was really quite exciting. And a lot of what we found was that people just didn't know about Amiatinus. They knew about some of the other, very famous gospel books. So the Lindisfarne Gospels, obviously also produced in this region, um, and it's that sort of insular artwork that you see in the Lindisfarne Gospels and the Book of Kells and things like that that really attracts people to this manuscript culture.
And insular here means belonging to the British Isles, doesn't it? That's
Yes.
use of that term. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's all that sort of intricate interlaced design and the animal figures and things like that that come into these scriptural manuscripts, that I think that tends to capture people's imagination. So in a way it was sort of justice for Codex Amiatinus that this book that is so technically brilliant as well as being beautiful in its own right, um, needs to be recognized as well.
And I love the idea of having a model of it. It was the same size but not the same weight. Is that right? It wasn't
That's
a
right. Yes.
34 kilo model. That's fantastic. And how did people? Yeah, what kind of response did you have from people then? You've told us a bit about yeah their growing knowledge, but what else? Any other responses you'd like to share from the tour?
Yeah, I think there was a huge amount of appreciation for the what Amiatinus means for the Northeast. That this wasn't produced even at sort of Canterbury or Kent, which were big monastic powerhouses at the time. It was produced here, and that is often just so ignored. And so people were quite moved by that. And there were a number of people who were joking about, we should bring it back here, and we ought to have it kept safe in the northeast of England, and it celebrated a bit more. And hopefully, with the interest that we got from teachers and people like that who visited, um, it will continue being a huge part of the legacy of the Northeast, with including, with it being able to be included in history and RE lessons and things like that in schools.
Is there any prospect of it coming to visit us as the Lindisfarne Gospels have done?
I think it's very unlikely that Amiatinus will come and visit. It's very hard to even go and see it in its location in Florence.
So, Lauren, we started, and you said that you'd set out in your theological interest teaching in kind of community groups and settings. How would you sum up the significance of Codex Amiatinus, and how would you relate it to people in perhaps those kinds of settings?
One of the most fascinating parts of Amiatinus is that it's a witness to Christianity in Northumbria in that period. And it's only a short time after Northumbria even became Christian, and already they'd gone from not Christian at all to being able to make what becomes the world's most significant Bible. And so it shows how quickly things can change and how vital it is really to hold on to those legacies and to keep things like the Codex Amiatinus and what it means for us today. And it also tells us the story of how those people, the people who produced it, understood their own faith and their own part in the Christian story. One of the things I haven't mentioned about Amiatinus is that it has 4 different contents pages. So one actual contents page of what is in Amiatinus, but also 3 separate versions indicating the order that they could have put the scriptural books, or a different combination of the books. And each of these comes with a justification of a different church father or significant figure who thought that the Bible should look like this. And so as they're producing this complete Bible for the first time, they are really self-conscious. They don't want the Pope to look at it and think, well, that's wrong. The Bible shouldn't look like this, or you shouldn't have the books of the Bible like this. And so even though it's such a big thing, such an important thing, it's something that they weren't necessarily even sure about doing. And so for church and community groups now, if there's something that feels like a change that needs to be made, or, there's a different way of showing the Bible that actually fits your community, then there's sort of a precedent for that. There's a way of doing that works and has this huge legacy. And so, creativity in that sense can be really helpful, I think, for the church.
That's really excellent. Lauren, thank you so much. You've taken us on an incredible journey. We've learned about the Codex, its travels. We've learned about something of its significance for the Northeast, and the way that you've been able to share that with ordinary people in this region through the rivers of ink. Thank you very much for coming on Talking Theology.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been great to chat with you.
Thank you for listening to Talking Theology, a podcast of Cranmer Hall, Durham, where we explore the best of academic theology and think creatively about how theological insights can shape Christian life, ministry and mission in today's world. If you enjoyed this episode of Talking Theology, subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. Follow us on X or Instagram at Talking Theo and share on social media. Cranmer Hall is a vibrant and diverse Christian community, forming Christ-like leaders for today's church. We offer training courses and degrees from BA to doctorate, available full-time and part-time, and we are home to students from a wide range of churches. Bursaries and scholarships are available to help with the cost of study. For details, visit our website, cranmerhall.com.